America First Policy Institute, Ken Timmerman. Great to have you with us, Ken. A guest of extraordinary distinction, I should say.
Thanks for having me on, John. It's always a pleasure.
So, there's, of course, a desire, Elon Musk and Jensen Huang and all these guys, they want access to the Chinese market. The question is, what does China want to give them access to the Chinese market? Talk about that.
Well, China wants their chips, and the Chinese want the most advanced chips for their AI, and I think that's where you may see a potential blockage. So far, it has been actually the Trump administration that has prevented them from selling the Blackwell chip, which is their most advanced chip. The Chinese have the generation before. I mean, it's still pretty darn good, and it's much better than anything that they want. Look, John, I think the president is going to Beijing with a tremendous amount of leverage. We have leverage over the Chinese on trade. Yes, he says we want them to open up their market, but it's basically so we can sell them goodies. Of course, they're going to want to open up our market to get our high tech. So I think the leverage is really more on our side. The Chinese, what can they do with us right now? They have been blocking sales of antimony and of rare earths. So they are blocking things to the United States. So you may get some loosening up on both sides on the trade issue. But the big thing, of course, right now is Iran. And the Chinese have been delivering dual-use technology to the Iranians. They have also been delivering rocket fuel, sodium perchlorate, which is an oxidizer for their solid missiles. And that is something that has got to stop. And I guarantee you that's going to be on the president's agenda in the backdoor talks.
Were you surprised at all that there wasn't some sort of pre-agreement or some sort of announcement? Sometimes with these summits, there's a initial kind of flurry of activity. We have these 4 hot-button issues that the Chinese embassy posted that say Trump U.S. diplomats must not be challenged. The Taiwan question, democracy and human rights, past and political systems, China's developmental rights. Development rights. President Trump was asked a question specifically about Jimmy Lai and human rights, and he says he would raise it. But that kind of goes against what the Chinese embassy is warning us not to do here.
Well, let's not forget, it's a communist government. It's a communist regime. It's a totalitarian regime, or authoritarian regime, I should say. Of course, they want to control everything. They want to micromanage. In previous summits, they've written their communiques before the two leaders even met. That's not President Trump's style. It's not what he's going to do. There are going to be some very tough talks behind closed doors. I suspect it's going to be the iron fist in the velvet glove, John. The president wants to use all of his charm in public, but behind closed doors, I think there's going to be really, really tough talk.
Yeah, I was kind of guessing that based on all the superlatives that President Trump has been using recently to talk about President Xi. I mentioned before whether there was some sort of initial breakthrough in the beginning here. And I specifically was thinking about this because just as President Trump was getting off of Air Force One in China, a report came down that a Chinese supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of Iraqi crude oil sailed through the Strait of Hormuz after being stranded in the Gulf for more than a month. It's now reportedly anchored off the Gulf of Oman. This is the third known passage by a Chinese oil tanker. Do you think this is something that the U.S. Navy facilitated with the blockade and made sure this Chinese tanker could get through, or is this something that the Iranians kind of allowed them to do?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know the hard facts of that. The Iranians have claimed that they reached an agreement with Baghdad to allow certain exports of Iraqi crude to get through, so it could have been the Iranians, but we could have stopped it had we wanted to, and we did not. So I think, again, the president is showing the Chinese, we've got you literally over the barrel because we control the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah, the Iranians might give you permission, but we actually control it, and that's important.
Do you expect to see any kind of kinetic military action while President Trump is in China? Everyone remembers the famous story. President Trump loves to tell this story. When President Xi was at Mar-a-Lago, he ordered the bombing in Syria. And President Xi, who's famously reluctant to speak English, even though he went to school in Iowa and speaks perfect English, looked up from his chocolate cake and kind of asked, what happened? You think President Trump was going to go for that sort of surprise while he's over there, or do you expect things to remain calm and the ceasefire to remain intact?
John, with President Trump, you never know. You never know. I mean, I'm ready for all kinds of surprises from this president. But he's got his Secretary of War with him on the plane, which would tend to lead you believe that he's going to wait till they get back to Washington. But look, everything, they are locked and loaded. They're ready to go. The ceasefire is not going well. The Iranians have violated it many times. I've got to tell you also, inside Iran, situation is getting much, much worse for the regime. They think that time is on their side. That is a miscalculation that they made. They thought that they could just string this out and they would be okay. But the longer it goes on, the more their economy is hurting, and it is even hurting the Iranian elites. And I think that is the big thing that's going to give them trouble. Just recently, they have several 100,000 living in Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the UAE. The UAE government has canceled their residence cards. In some cases, if they had left the UAE, they're not allowing them to return, even to pack up their houses. So they've made huge investments. Their bank accounts are frozen. When the elites get hurt, the regime is in trouble.
Yeah, and I think you got to acknowledge the UAE here, and they've obviously been attacked by Iran, but to see this a response from the UAE, and especially in the wake of the Abraham Accords, we do start to see the difference in what a Middle East, a modern Middle East can actually look like. I also wanted to ask you about this New York Times report from Jonathan Swan that claims that Iran has restored operational access to 30 of its 33 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz and still retains about 70% of its pre-war missile arsenal. What do you make of these reports, Ken? We talked about the leaks here. This seems like this is the exact type of information that the Iranian regime would want to see published in the New York Times.
Of course they would. And of course the New York Times would want to publish information that would benefit the Iranian regime, because that's what they have done consistently. They're rooting for the wrong side in this. The president has called the leakers traitors. He has said this is treason, what they are doing. And the reports themselves probably, if they are U.S. intelligence reports, they probably have a low end and a high end. And what the New York Times is printing is the high end. I'm sure that they have rebuilt some of these missile sites. It would be silly for them not to. It would be uncharacteristic for them not to. But I'm also convinced that we know where they are, and the U.S. military can handle them when the kinetic war starts again, which I think it will as soon as the president gets back.
Yeah, maybe even after he takes off on Air Force One to head back to the United States. We'll see. Ken Timmerman, always great to have you, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Always a pleasure.